They thought it was just a ceremony. But what happened inside the Capitol Rotunda stunned the entire nation. As Melania Trump took the stage and delivered a veiled jab at President Biden's health, over 500 lawmakers held their breath, waiting for someone to speak up. But it wasn't a man who answered. It was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a Southern-born trial lawyer with courtroom calm and a memory like steel. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She simply stood and delivered one sentence so controlled, so clear, it silenced even her critics. And now, if you believe in dignity, truth, and leadership that doesn't yell but holds the line, tap like, hit subscribe, and stay with us, because what happened next might be the most powerful political moment you've never heard. The Capitol Rotunda has seen its share of history. Great speeches, tragic farewells, fierce debates echoed off its marble walls. But on that particular afternoon, it wasn't thunder or fury that stole the room. It was silence. A silence so thick, so deliberate, it felt like the calm before a tornado no one saw coming. To the outside world, the event was billed as a bipartisan moment of celebration, a signing ceremony for a new education initiative designed to bridge party lines. Cameras were in place, reporters dressed in their Capitol best lined the back, and the air buzzed with a rehearsed kind of unity, one that looked good in photographs, but felt too polished, too timed, like the breath someone takes before a punchline that's about to cut. Jasmine Crockett sat in the third row on the left side of the aisle, Democrat territory. She wore a sharp navy suit, no jewelry but her watch, her curls pinned with surgical precision, her lips bare of color, but set in a line that said she wasn't here to be photographed. She held no phone, no small talk. Just a leather-bound folder resting on her lap, her fingers gently tapping a rhythm known only to those preparing to speak without being invited. Across the aisle, the Republicans filled their seats in quiet clusters, exchanging handshakes that lasted half a beat too long, smiles that barely reached the eyes. They weren't just ready for a ceremony. They were expecting a moment, a shift, something rehearsed but risky. What the program didn't say, what no media outlet had picked up on yet, was that Melania Trump had requested to speak second, not first. A small detail, one that barely raised an eyebrow in the planning meetings. But to those who understood political theater, it was a signal. She wanted to respond to something or someone, and Jasmine Crockett knew it. The night before, a message had arrived. No subject line, no sender, just a few plain words typed in courier font like someone didn't want to leave a fingerprint. Check Melania's draft, off script, she's coming for Biden. That was it. But for Crockett, a trained trial attorney from Texas who built her reputation not on noise, but on note-taking and surgical responses, that was all she needed. She didn't sound the alarm. She didn't alert her party or try to reshuffle the program. She did what she always did before a courtroom ambush. She prepared. And when Jasmine prepared, she didn't just gather quotes. She gathered facts, receipts, patterns of speech, old interviews, everything a skilled cross-examiner needs to take down a polished witness with just one sentence. Outside the rotunda, the weather was perfect, clear blue skies over D.C., the kind of spring day that made the Capitol dome look like a postcard. Tourists posed on the marble steps, unaware that inside, history wasn't just being signed, it was being baited. Inside, the room was filling up. The Speaker of the House stood off to the side of the podium, quietly reviewing note cards. Staffers adjusted lapel mics. Congressional interns passed water bottles with the urgency of people who knew their job was to stay invisible unless summoned. Jasmine sat unmoving, a portrait of calm. But if you watched closely, her left thumb tapped once every 8 seconds, a metronome of focus. She wasn't anxious. She was indexing. At 3:04 p.m., a subtle stir shifted the room. Heads turned, phones rose. Melania Trump had entered. She moved like a figure from a Renaissance painting. Every step measured, the cream-colored dress clinging in flawless symmetry to her frame. Her heels echoed across the marble, with a sound too soft to be called footsteps and too exact to be accidental. Behind her, a trail of aides fanned out like shadows, men in tailored navy suits, one clutching a leather folio embossed with gold initials, MT. Another subtly scanned the crowd with the cold efficiency of a campaign strategist looking for weakness. Melania took her seat 2 rows ahead of Jasmine. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She knew who was behind her. The cameras clicked like a heartbeat. The reporters leaned forward, sensing something but unsure what. Jasmine opened her folder, not casually, deliberately. Inside were color-coded tabs, yellow for legislation, blue for historical precedent, red for quotes, and green for contingencies. One tab was simply labeled "Be Best" in black ink. She didn't flip to it. Not yet. She didn't need to. She knew what was there. Across the aisle, Melania opened her folder too. Inside were two versions of her speech, one scripted and safe, the other annotated with handwritten notes, a pause here, a look there, and a line, underlined twice, about clarity in leadership. Jasmine glanced at her watch. 3:07 p.m. The speaker tapped the mic, his voice booming through the rotunda. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today." And just like that, the ceremony began. But make no mistake, it wasn't unity on display. It was a standoff. Two women, two philosophies, two tones of power. And somewhere in between, an entire country unknowingly bracing for the moment one would strike first, and the other would choose not to strike back, but to redefine what it means to lead. The speaker's voice echoed across the marble dome, introducing Melania Trump with measured formality, his words wrapped in the neutral cadence of political ceremony. A woman whose advocacy for American children has been recognized across the nation, former First Lady Melania Trump. Polite applause followed, Republicans standing with choreographed enthusiasm, Democrats offering subdued, respectful nods. Jasmine Crockett did not clap. She didn't shift. She watched. Melania rose like royalty, her steps precise, her expression soft but unreadable, sculpted with the quiet confidence of someone who knew every camera lens was already trained on her. There was no fumble, no nervous breath, no tell, only calculation. She reached the podium and offered a practiced smile to the room, not warm, not cold, measured, rehearsed. And then she began. "Thank you, Mr. Speaker," she said, her voice low, graceful, touched by her signature European accent that made even ordinary words sound elevated. "It is a great honor to speak on a matter that is so close to my heart." She launched into familiar territory, education, kindness, childhood development. For the first few minutes, everything followed the script. Jasmine noted the cadence, the phrasing, standard political boilerplate, praise for bipartisan cooperation, nods to the Be Best campaign, an almost saccharine call for civility and decency in the national conversation. And then came the shift. It was almost imperceptible at first, a slightly longer pause between paragraphs, a glance down at the alternate speech pages, and then a subtle sharpening of her tone. "For education to succeed," Melania said, "it must be guided by clarity." Another pause. Then, clarity in goals, clarity in expectations, and yes, clarity in leadership. Jasmine's pen paused mid-mark. The room had shifted. "Unfortunately," Melania continued, "we have seen troubling signs, not in our classrooms, but at the very top." A hush fell over the chamber. Camera shutters clicked faster. Journalists straightened in their chairs. "When the President of the United States," she said carefully, "cannot remember his own cabinet members, when he must be led by hand to find a seat, when every press conference is a reminder of decline, then how can we trust him to lead the education of our children?" Gasps didn't fill the room. The silence was too strong for that. But a collective breath held, eyes widened, pens dropped. Some Republicans leaned back with slight smirks of satisfaction. Some Democrats stiffened, mouths tightening. And Jasmine? Jasmine didn't blink. Her hands rested lightly on her notes, her breathing even. But inside, every neural pathway fired with precision. The line had been crossed. Melania wasn't done. "We cannot shape young minds with policies designed by fading ones," she said, her tone still serene, as if discussing the weather. "Children deserve clarity, not confusion. Confidence, not cognitive gaps." That was the moment the room cracked. The rotunda wasn't a rotunda anymore. It was a courtroom, a battlefield, a stage, and Melania had thrown the first stone. Jasmine inhaled deeply, but subtly. Her jaw shifted slightly. To the untrained eye, she still looked composed, but to those who had watched her in action, the attorneys, the judges, the witnesses who had once underestimated her, they would have recognized the change. Not panic, not anger, precision. She was preparing her response. Melania concluded her speech not with fire, but with ice. Let us put politics aside and protect our children with true leadership. She closed her folder, smiled, stepped back. Applause erupted from the right side of the aisle. A standing ovation by some, half-hearted claps from others who weren't sure if this had gone too far. On the left, the reaction was fractured. Some clapped politely, others folded their arms. One lawmaker whispered, "Did she just go there?" Jasmine didn't move. The speaker returned, visibly rattled. "Thank you, Mrs. Trump, for those thought-provoking remarks," he said, stumbling slightly over the word. "Next, we will hear from Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who played a vital role in drafting the equity provisions of this bill." The room stilled again. The quiet wasn't silence now. It was suspense. Jasmine rose, not quickly, not slowly, deliberately. She gathered her folder, smoothed her jacket, and stepped into the aisle. Her heels tapped out a steady rhythm as she walked to the podium. But the sound wasn't just her footsteps. It was the sound of resolve, of dignity, of a reckoning walking quietly to center stage. Melania sat still. Her smile had faltered only a millimeter, but it was enough. Jasmine's shadow passed her seat, and for the briefest moment, the former First Lady's eyes flicked upward. And Jasmine Crockett, the daughter of the South, the courtroom veteran, the woman who had sat still through 1,000 storms, did not look back. She stepped to the podium, she placed her folder down, and looked up. She did not speak, not yet. And in that moment, the silence that Melania had shattered was reclaimed. Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium, her hands resting calmly on either side of the folder she had brought with her. She didn't adjust the microphone, she didn't shuffle her notes, she didn't even clear her throat. She simply stood, perfectly still, eyes raised, gaze level, her silence echoing louder than applause. There was a subtle shift in the room, as if the air itself had leaned in to listen, not to a voice, but to a presence. A clock ticked somewhere behind the chamber wall. Jasmine's breathing, slow and deliberate, matched its rhythm. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. Her eyes swept the room, not scanning, not searching, measuring the tension, measuring the weight of what had just been said, measuring the depth of restraint it would take not to meet fire with fire, but to offer clarity in the face of cruelty. "Thank you, Mr. Speaker," she began, her voice even, warm, grounded, a deliberate contrast to the chill that had just swept the room. "I came here today to talk about education, about opportunity, about how we equip the next generation with the tools to build a future we all believe in." There was no tremble, no rush. Each word came out like a truth carved from stone, measured, earned, intentional. "But before I do," she said, allowing the pause to hold just long enough for anticipation to pulse, "I'd like to speak to something that was just said." Eyes darted from her to Melania. Some aides in the back stood completely still, unsure whether to lean forward or shrink back. Jasmine didn't look at the former First Lady, not once. She didn't need to. The power wasn't in eye contact, it was in elevation. In my years as a public defender, I learned that the loudest person in the room isn't always the one who's winning. Sometimes, the person who's listening the closest, preparing the most, and speaking the least, is the one carrying the truth. She paused. This time, a deliberate silence, not emptiness, anticipation, the kind that makes a room lean forward together. We live in a world where age is used as a weapon, where dignity can be dressed up as weakness, and where those who have given their lives in service are reduced to talking points. No raised voice, no sharp jab. But the blow landed. You could feel it in the breath that seemed to disappear from the room. "My father," she said, voice softening but gaining emotional weight, "was a brilliant man, a professor, a husband, a community leader. He taught math and life in equal measure. He also struggled, later in life, with the very conditions some mock today with a smile on their face. A gasp, faint and involuntary, escaped from somewhere near the back. I watched him forget names, misplace keys, ask questions he once knew better than anyone else in the room, but never, not once, did I question his worth. She exhaled slowly. Because value does not fade with memory, and leadership isn't proven by the sharpness of a speech, but by the depth of compassion and the courage to keep showing up. A shift rippled through the room. Chairs creaked, papers rustled, someone sniffled. Jasmine's tone stayed even, but her eyes sharpened. "It is one thing to disagree with policy," she said. "It is another to disguise mockery as concern and call it patriotism." The line fell like a gavel. She slowly opened her folder, revealing the tab marked "Be Best." She flipped a single page. In 2018, she read, the former First Lady said, "We must teach our children the importance of kindness, empathy, and respect." Another page. In 2019, "Bullying is a silent killer. We must combat cruelty in all forms." Jasmine looked up, eyes calm but firm. I believe those words. I still do, which is why it's heartbreaking to watch the person who once spoke them turn them into a weapon. She closed the folder. We teach our children to be kind, not because it's easy, but because it's right. Silence stretched again. Not awkward, not forced, sacred, and Jasmine's voice dropped lower, not in volume, but in gravity. So, let us be clear. This bill is not about one man's memory. It's about every child's future. And if we want to prepare them for tomorrow, we must do better today. Saya. Then, without drama or flourish, she turned a page in her notes, the signal that she was done addressing the insult, and now ready to do what she came to do, govern. And just like that, with silence and steel, Jasmine Crockett didn't just reclaim the floor. She reset the temperature of the entire room. Jasmine Crockett did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. She had the room, not with volume, but with presence, with truth. But as her next sentence emerged, calm, controlled, and impossibly poised, the room understood it wasn't just hearing a rebuttal. It was witnessing a redefinition of what leadership looks like under fire. Dignity, she said, her voice strong but unhurried, isn't requested, it's demonstrated. You could feel it land, like a final chord in a symphony that had been building silently through tension, resistance, and restraint. Even the press gallery, seasoned and cynical, paused. Fingers hovered over keyboards. Phones were lifted not for tweets, but for evidence. That line didn't shout, it thundered, and it would echo. Melania didn't move, but the smile on her face, once so composed, was now still, a frame caught mid-collapse. Jasmine continued seamlessly now, weaving her speech back into policy without ever fully closing the door on what had just passed. This bill matters, she said, her tone now rising only slightly, because it touches every classroom where a teacher is trying to see the whole child, not just their scores, not just their behavior, but their soul. It matters because education is not a luxury for the fit, the favored, or the remembered. It is a right for every child, in every condition, in every stage of life. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She governed. In the audience, a Republican congressman who had clapped for Melania earlier now stared at Jasmine with a thoughtful, if uncomfortable gaze. One aide from the speaker's office whispered to another, "That line, did you get that line?" "Already trending," came the answer. Jasmine turned a page in her notes again, but she wasn't reading. She was now speaking from a deeper place. Not the speech she wrote, but the one she had lived. Her years in Dallas courtrooms, her father's decline, her own encounters with subtle slights disguised as praise. "We are not here to perform politics," she said. "We are here to practice it, to serve, to legislate, to heal. And if we forget that, if we reduce our roles to clickbait or cruelty, then we fail not just ourselves, but everyone watching, who still believes in what this place can be." She paused, letting the marble chamber reflect her words back to her and then to them. "Because they are watching," she said, "not just voters, not just the pundits, our children, our parents, the ones who remember what respect looked like before it became a punchline. Shiam, A flicker of movement from the press gallery, a camera operator fighting tears. On the left side of the aisle, a senator leaned forward, nodding slowly. Across the chamber, Melania's aide tapped a phone screen rapidly, likely coordinating messaging cleanup before the segment hit prime time. But Jasmine didn't rush to finish. She allowed the story to deepen. "I want to speak to every family watching this," she said. "Every household where someone has watched a loved one fade, not in spirit, but in memory. Where they've seen greatness slowly disappear into silence and still showed up with kindness and care. You have not failed. You are not less than. You are leading in ways we too often ignore." She looked out across the room, no longer delivering a speech, but holding a mirror. And to the children sitting next to their grandparents, the caretakers sitting by the hospital beds, the wives still waking up to names forgotten. "I see you, I respect you, and I will fight for you. Will Tamjout." It wasn't just a pivot. It wasn't just restraint. It was transformation. And by the time she turned her final page and closed her folder, there was no applause. Not yet. Not because they disagreed, but because no one wanted to break what she had just built. Silence held, reverent, full. And then, as if on cue from something deeper than protocol, a single person stood, then another, and another. The rotunda rose, not in defiance or division, but in recognition. Jasmine Crockett had just rewritten the rules. She had taken a room tilted by mockery and anchored it in meaning. She had spoken the kind of truth that doesn't need permission to land. And Melania Trump, sitting still in the second row, felt that truth settle around her like judgment. The rotunda emptied slowly that evening, not with the noisy buzz of post-ceremony chatter, but with the quiet shuffle of people, unsure whether they had just witnessed politics or something greater. Conversations were hushed, Reporters spoke in fragments. Staffers stood off to the side, clutching clipboards and blinking, as if waking from a trance. Outside, beneath the soft wash of Capitol lights, even the traffic seemed to move more gently, as if the city itself were reluctant to return to its usual rhythm. In the hours that followed, Jasmine Crockett didn't post a statement. She didn't offer a press release. She didn't call in to late-night news. She walked quietly back to her office, her folder clutched under one arm, her phone dark in her hand. Behind her, colleagues followed, some stunned into silence, others trying to find the words that would do the moment justice. Inside the press room, chaos bloomed. Editors barked into phones. Headlines were drafted and redrafted. Clips were clipped, quoted, captioned. The words that had stopped the room, "Dignity isn't requested, it's demonstrated," appeared within the hour on cable news, on Twitter, in group chats and Slack channels. It was trending by 7:04 p.m. By 7:07, it was being stitched into TikTok videos. By 7:20, it was being printed onto signs, not just because it was powerful, but because it was needed. The backlash came too, but not the way Melania's team expected. The usual defenders of sharp rhetoric, of biting commentary, faltered. Some tried to explain it away. She was only pointing out the reality. Others doubled down. It was a fair question about fitness, but it didn't stick, because something had shifted, a cultural tremor, soft but unmistakable. In living rooms across America, older couples paused their dinners to rewind the broadcast. Adult children called their parents. Grandchildren turned and asked, "Is that what Grandpa has?" In hospital rooms and nursing homes, the video of Jasmine speaking found its way onto iPads. Nurses paused rounds to watch. One left a sticky note under a patient's tray. "You're not forgotten." In church groups, the clip played after prayer. In classrooms, it was dissected as civics. In women's circles, book clubs, and Facebook comment threads that usually argued politics to exhaustion, it landed like a bomb. Not because Jasmine had won a political debate, but because she had done something else. She had named a pain so many had lived through, but hadn't known how to express. By morning, the media coverage had coalesced. NPR ran a headline, "A new standard for response, Crockett's quiet power." CNN called it a masterclass. Fox News, caught off guard, hesitated between condemnation and reluctant admiration. Even hosts known for their cynicism couldn't deny it. Crockett had kept her calm, held her line, and changed the room. In Melania Trump's camp, Emergency meetings were held. Her comms team scrambled to pivot. A statement was released just before dawn. Mrs. Trump's comments were intended to express concern over policy leadership, not personal health. She respects all families who care for aging loved ones. But the damage had already settled in. Clips of her smirking mid-speech were replayed beside Jasmine's solemn pause. Side by side, they told the story without needing words. By the end of the week, op-eds poured in. The Atlantic called it a turning point. The New York Times referred to Jasmine as the voice of measured grace. And then came the echoes. A city councilwoman in Michigan quoted Jasmine in a meeting on elder care. A college debate team in Colorado opened with, "Dignity isn't requested." Patiot, a mother in Florida, printed the quote and pinned it beside her father's hospice bed. A small business owner in Kansas posted it in the window of her diner. Jasmine didn't respond publicly until days later, at a small gathering in her home district. The town hall wasn't televised. No journalists were present, just voters, neighbors, veterans, nurses, and retirees who had followed her for years. Someone asked, gently, "Congresswoman, how did you stay so calm?" Jasmine smiled, not wide, but real. "Because I knew what mattered more than the insult," she said. "What mattered was the people who would hear what I said, not the one who triggered it. What mattered was how it would land in the hearts of people who've had to hold dignity in silence their whole lives." She paused, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that moment from them. The room went still, not because people were surprised, but because they knew it was true. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a representative. She was a mirror, a standard, a reminder that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it holds still. Sometimes it speaks with the weight of every person who's ever been mocked and stayed standing anyway. That line, "Dignity isn't requested, it's demonstrated," continued to travel. It appeared on mugs, t-shirts, school banners. It was etched into the glass of a hospital wing named for elder care. It was read aloud at a funeral service for a woman with Alzheimer's by her granddaughter. And for Melania Trump? Her team retreated from the spotlight. Her next scheduled appearance was canceled. Her approval rating dipped quietly among moderates. But it wasn't scandal. It wasn't rage. It was the slow, unmistakable withdrawal of grace from someone who once preached kindness but forgot how to carry it. And Jasmine, she kept working. She returned to the floor. She wrote bills. She visited classrooms. And she spoke to caregivers in ways that few lawmakers had ever bothered to. Not for show, but because she had seen the pain. She had lived the story. And she had once again proven that in an age where cruelty can be viral, clarity can still cut deeper. Months passed. The phrase Crockett moment entered the lexicon. College professors used it in lectures. Therapists used it in sessions. Parents used it to explain what it means to respond with power but not cruelty. It became a measuring stick, not for victory but for character. And Jasmine Crockett never once tried to own it. She didn't trademark it. She didn't brand it, because she knew it was never hers alone. It belonged to every person who had ever been silenced and chose not to disappear. To every grandchild who still visits their grandfather even after the stories stop making sense. To every woman who has had to smile through condescension and keep the meeting moving anyway. So, if you ask what leadership looks like in 2025, don't look at the loudest person in the room. Look for the one who knew when to pause, who knew that silence could be armor, who stood calmly, told the truth, and let the nation remember what it means to be dignified. And if this story moved you, share it. Because somewhere out there, someone else is being baited right now, waiting, watching, wondering if they'll have to shout to be heard. They won't, because Jasmine already did the hard part. She showed the world you don't have to raise your voice to raise the standard.